Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Austin Stewart, and the informative speech that I've chosen to give you is going to be on the history of comics in the United States. Overall, this slideshow is going to start with the overview. First, we're going to have the introduction, and then go into the different eras of comics, such as the Golden Age, Silver, Bronze, and Modern Age, and then finish up with an oral conclusion. First, to start with the introduction, my goal in this is to inform you guys on how comics have grown and changed in the United States and how significant historical events have impacted comics evolution. We currently live in a time where our forms of media and entertainment are dominated by images of comic book heroes, and we and our parents, depending on your age, can easily relate to them. But why is that? How is it that something that seems so childish is in such popular demand? I've done a decent amount of research over the past week, and I think I've compiled a timeline of reasons why these are so relatable and why they have deeply impacted us so much. Comics, as we know them, have existed since the 1800s in side-by-side panel format. They have been seen in a lot of different lights by society, whether it's good or bad, and the impact of comics has been cataloged over the last 2 centuries and how societal views have directly changed them. First, we're going to start with proto-comics, which began in the late 1800s. These preludes to comics were one-time prints released in hardback form. It wasn't until the 1920s, though, that they became monthly periodical comedic comics that were published in newspapers. And these short funnies remained in style until about the beginning of World War II. Now, come the late 1930s to the 1960s is what is known as the Golden Age of comics. There was an increase in interest in comics that definitely ushered in what is known as the Golden Age. Popular heroes such as Batman, Superman, Captain America began to surface and were commonly depicted battling against enemies such as the Axis forces. If you're currently looking at my slideshow, you'd see here on the right that there is actually a picture of Captain America in a physical confrontation against Adolf Hitler. You can see that there's a very strong depiction of the swastika in the background, as well as on Hitler's arm. Captain America is donned in a very traditional red, white, and blue garb showing stars and stripes. Definitely meant to be very patriotic. It's definitely seen that the comics gained a lot of momentum due to their ability to keep up with modern events. They created a lot of larger-than-life characters, such as Superman, faster than a speeding bullet, Captain America, and they were able to reach a vast audience that included children from 7 to 17, as well as soldiers stationed overseas during the conflict. These soldiers definitely preferred these due to their cost efficiency, as well as how easily disposable they were. Now, moving on into what is known as the Silver Age of comics, picking up where the Golden Age left off in the 1960s, as comics began to wane in their popularity due to the decrease in conflict. Production continued on the comics, however, the number of readers was not increasing. Soon, a lot of comics were being canceled, such as The Flash and Green Lantern, and new genres were starting to rise, such as westerns, true crimes, and even horror comics. A lot of these were very gruesome, gory. They showed a lot of detail that a lot of people didn't feel comfortable with at the time. And due to this, the view had been synthesized that this new darker genre of comics had caused an increase in teenage delinquency. And in response, the Senate Subcommittee of Juvenile Delinquency met and pushed for the banning of comics in a lot of cities, schools, and they've even pushed for the burning of comics in city squares, trying to oust the juvenile delinquency problem. And the comic book community responded with the creation of the Comic Code Authority, which was put in place, and it was a self-censoring mechanism to try and slow and change people's perspective. You know, they cut out a lot of sexuality, gore, profanity in order to try and maintain their sales. And the icon, if you are looking at this right now, is seen just right below Superman. It says approved by the Comics Code Authority, and even here on a print that I have in my home, you can see it's going to be backwards to you, but it says approved by the Comics Code Authority. This was a way of showing parents that this comic had been deemed safe for their children and was likely not to lead to delinquency. Now, at the end of the Silver Age, sales still had decreased, and a new era had been ushered in, known as the Bronze Age, which had taken a slightly different turn. Marvel Comics began to emerge, spearheaded by Stan Lee, who many of us know because of his work with Marvel Comics. However, Stan Lee had a different approach to superheroes than that of DC. Stan Lee wanted to humanize a lot of his characters, and through that he created conflicts internally and externally that characters like Superman didn't face, whether that was racism, substance abuse, or even political corruption. And if you look at this image here on the right, you see the famed Tony Stark, who is seeming to fight with his alcoholism. And one of the main titles on here is Demon in a Bottle, referring to his issue with alcohol. And so, you know, there was a push to try and humanize heroes, show that they too had struggles, and that you know, they had struggled just like we did. We also saw in this time period an increase in female superheroes such as Spider-Woman, She-Hulk, Wonder Woman was gaining a lot of momentum. So there was definitely still some change that was still on the horizon with that, and a lot of the social aspects of our world were definitely impacting the comic world. Then we move on to the end of the Bronze Age into what is now known as the Modern Age or the Dark Age, which is from the 1980s to the present. Now, this era is not referred to the Dark Age due to lack of work, but rather the comics grew darker. The censorship of the comics that we had discussed from the Silver Age had begun to diminish, and with that, many stories started to see reboot. And one of those stories is the Death of Superman, which is probably one of the more renowned retellings of one of the greatest superhero stories of all times. Now, with the decrease in censorship, there's also a lot of free reign for changing the way comics were perceived. If you look here, not the main picture that says Flashpoint, but rather the X-Men picture, you see what is two members of the Astonishing X-Men, both male, seeming to be getting married. And this deeply reflects a lot of our societal changes, and the comics are reflecting that. And we're seeing a lot how these two are sort of mirroring one another. We also saw a lot of anti-heroes rise in this era. You know, a lot of us are familiar with Deadpool, Wolverine, the Punisher, who they're much darker. Even Batman became one when he was really originally not intended to be. These anti-heroes were doing the right things for the wrong reasons and the wrong things for the right reasons. And they lived in a much darker world. And they faced much more twisted supervillains, much like the Dark Knight's Joker, who were more of a horror film antagonist. And, you know, overall, this is where we are now, and we see a lot of these new moods and views reflected in even a lot of our movies and TV shows. Um, next slide. So um, basically, in conclusion, I feel like comics have grown and changed in the United States and globally, and a lot of this correlation is directly linked to historical events that have impacted society, and society has also impacted a lot of the views of the comics. Um, Now, I don't think it's seen that comics are tools for delinquents or soldiers to pass time, but rather a nostalgic point that individuals from multiple generations can relate to, and they remain relevant even now into 2017. And I think that says a lot about the impact that they have made, and that it's definitely good that we did not extinguish the flame that is the American comic book trend. Um, I really hope that I was at least able to enlighten you guys a little bit. I look forward to having a discussion with you about what you think. And if you have any questions about it, be sure to ask me. And thank you for your time. You have a good evening.